My name is John, and my life is like a roller coaster, only without the fun and adrenaline. Every day is like the previous one. Work, home, family. Sometimes I feel like I'm stuck in an endless loop, like in the movie Groundhog Day. Only there's no Bill Murray on the horizon. My wife Lisa is a real workaholic. She's always at work, and when she has a free moment, she prefers to spend it shopping or at the spa with her friends. Don't get me wrong, I love my wife, but sometimes it seems like we're living in parallel universes. And then one day, Lisa went on another business trip, leaving me alone with the joys of bachelorhood, beer, pizza, and baseball on TV. I was already anticipating several days of blissful idleness when suddenly the phone rang. "Hello," I grumbled, mentally saying goodbye to my lazy rest. "John, it's Margaret. I have a small problem here." My mother-in-law's voice sounded agitated. Margaret is Lisa's mom, and my mother-in-law. She lives alone in a big house on the other side of town and is known for her independence and resilience. But now there were notes of panic in her voice. "What happened, Margaret?" I asked, trying to figure out what to prepare for, a cockroach invasion or a leaking roof. "My fridge. It broke down. Everything I bought yesterday has gone bad. Could you help me choose a new one? I don't understand anything about it." And she sighed heavily, as if admitting her helplessness was beyond her strength. I thought for a second. The prospect of spending the day lugging heavy boxes and sorting out instructions didn't appeal to me. But then I imagined Margaret sitting alone among the spoiled food, and my heart sank. "Of course, Margaret. I'll be right over," I said, and hung up the phone and started to get ready. On the way to Margaret's, I pondered the vicissitudes of fate. Just this morning, I was planning to spend the day on the couch, and now I'm driving across town to save my mother-in-law from a refrigerator apocalypse. Indeed, man proposes. When I got to Margaret's house, she met me at the door with the look of a queen whose castle had been besieged by barbarians. She was wearing an impeccable suit, and her hair was styled in a perfect hairdo. Only her slightly trembling hands betrayed her agitation. "John, thank you for coming so quickly," she said, gesturing for me to come in. "I'm completely confused. How will I cook and entertain now?" I smiled, imagining Margaret handing out spoiled food to guests. The situation was really dire. "Don't worry, Margaret. Now we'll go to the store, choose the best refrigerator for you, and then I'll help you install it. Everything will be fine." And looking into her hopeful eyes, I suddenly felt like a real knight. Let my steed be an old Toyota and my sword a wrench. The main thing is to save the lady from the refrigerator dragon, right? The appliance store greeted us with a cacophony of sounds and colors, dozens of refrigerators lined up in a row, gleaming with chrome sides and promising buyers a heavenly life. I couldn't help but whistle, estimating how many zeros would be on the price tag. Margaret, however, looked confused. She shifted her gaze from one model to another, and her face reflected a painful thought process. "Maybe this one? Or is it better to take the one with 2 doors? And what about the color? Stainless steel or white after all?" She wrung her hands as if the fate of humanity depended on this choice. I suppressed a smile. Who would have thought that my always confident and decisive mother-in-law could be so worried about ordinary household appliances? "Let's think logically," I suggested. "Do you need a big fridge or a small one? With or without a freezer?" Margaret pondered. "A big one, I guess. I like to cook in advance and entertain guests. And a freezer is a must. I always keep a supply of frozen foods there in case of unexpected visits." I nodded. The matter was beginning to clear up. We began methodically examining the models, noting the pros and cons of each. Gradually, Margaret got carried away with the process, and her eyes sparkled with the excitement of a hunter. "Look, John, this model saves energy, and there's even a special shelf for wine. Can you imagine?" She smiled like a child in a candy store. I couldn't help but smile back. Who would have thought that choosing a refrigerator could be such a fascinating activity? A couple of hours later, we finally decided on a model. It was a big silver beauty, with a bunch of bells and whistles and an impressive price tag. But looking at Margaret's happy face, I knew it was worth it. "Thank you, John," she said as we were processing the delivery. "I never would have managed without you." "You're welcome, Margaret. I'm glad I could help. Now you can safely cook your signature dishes and gather guests," I winked. She laughed. And at that moment, I suddenly saw her not as a strict mother-in-law, but just as a woman. Beautiful, elegant, and so lonely. For some reason, this thought made my heart clench. On the way home, we chatted about little things. Margaret talked about her hobbies, her favorite books and movies. It turned out we had much more in common than I thought. We laughed, argued, exchanged life stories. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone. When we pulled up to Margaret's house, I suddenly realized that I didn't want this day to end. A strange feeling, considering that just this morning I was dreaming only of the couch and beer. "Would you like to come in for a cup of coffee?" Margaret offered, as if reading my mind. "I have a great Jamaican Blue Mountain." I nodded, trying not to show how much this invitation pleased me. After all, what's wrong with having coffee with your mother-in-law? It's not a date, really. If only I knew where this innocent cup of coffee would lead. The new refrigerator was delivered the next day. I took a day off from work to help Margaret with the installation. Not that I was a big appliance expert, but the prospect of spending another day in my mother-in-law's company seemed very tempting. When I arrived, Margaret was already waiting for me. She was wearing a charming home suit, and her hair was gathered in a casual bun. She looked simple and at the same time very feminine. "John, you are my savior!" she exclaimed, opening the door. "I have no idea what to do with all these wires and hoses." I smiled, secretly flattered by her words. It's nice to feel needed and indispensable. "Don't worry, Margaret. We'll figure it all out now. The main thing is to find the instructions and follow them step by step." We spent the next few hours battling the fridge. It wasn't that easy. The instructions were written in some technical language that sounded more like Chinese. But we didn't give up. Armed with wrenches and screwdrivers, we methodically disassembled and assembled parts, argued over diagrams, and cursed in unison when something didn't work out. At some point, I noticed that Margaret and I were working like a well-oiled team. She would hand me tools, I would tighten the nuts. We understood each other with half a word, as if we had been doing this all our lives. When the fridge was finally installed and plugged in, we plopped down on chairs with a sense of accomplishment. "Phew, I feel like I've run a marathon," Margaret admitted, wiping the beads of sweat from her forehead. "But it was worth it. Look how beautiful it is." I nodded, admiring our brainchild. The fridge was gleaming like a new dime and humming quietly, hinting at its superiority over all other kitchen appliances. "Yes, we did a great job. Now all that's left is to fill it with food." I winked at Margaret. She laughed and suddenly hugged me impulsively. I froze in surprise, not knowing where to put my hands. But then I cautiously hugged her back. "Thank you, John," she whispered in my ear. "You have no idea how much you've done for me." I felt a shiver run through my body. Her closeness, her scent, her warmth, it all suddenly seemed so right and natural. "You're welcome, Margaret," I answered hoarsely. "I'm always happy to help." She pulled away and looked into my eyes. There was something new in her gaze that I hadn't noticed before, something warm and inviting. "You know, we should celebrate our little victory," she said slyly. "How about dinner? I'll make my signature lasagna, and you can tell me a couple more of your famous jokes." My heart skipped a beat. Dinner with Margaret? Alone? This already smelled like something more than just a family relationship. But looking into her shining eyes, I couldn't refuse. "I'd love to," I replied, feeling my lips spread into a smile on their own. "But first, we'll have to go grocery shopping. We're not going to eat lasagna with empty shelves." Margaret nodded cheerfully, and we started making a shopping list. And only one thought was spinning in my head. How did I come to this? Dinner was a great success. The lasagna was simply divine, and the wine was tart and aromatic. Margaret and I chatted about everything in the world: books, movies, politics, and even the latest celebrity gossip. On this issue, my mother-in-law was a real guru. Gradually, the conversation became more personal and frank. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe the cozy atmosphere and the subdued light. But we both felt that something special was growing between us. "You know, John, I wasn't always like this," Margaret suddenly confessed, thoughtfully looking into her glass. "I used to be completely different, bold, daring, ready for adventure. But then life changed me." I silently nodded, giving her a chance to speak her mind. I myself was interested to learn more about her past. "When my husband, Lisa's father, died, it was as if I lost a part of myself," Margaret continued, and sad notes sounded in her voice. "I had to become strong, take on all the responsibilities. I was afraid to show weakness, afraid that I wouldn't cope. So I turned into the Margaret, strict, unapproachable, always dissatisfied with everyone. She smiled sadly, and I suddenly saw her in a completely different light, not as a stern mother-in-law, but as a fragile woman who had carried an unbearable burden on her shoulders for too long. "Margaret, you are an amazing woman," I said sincerely, covering her hand with mine. "What you've done for Lisa, how you've coped all these years, it's admirable. And believe me, under the mask of severity, I've always seen your kind heart." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and then she suddenly leaned over and kissed me. It was so unexpected and so wonderful that for a moment I couldn't breathe. The kiss lasted only a few seconds, but it seemed to me that an eternity had passed. When we broke apart, the room was filled with a ringing silence. "I'm sorry, John, I shouldn't have," Margaret began, but I interrupted her by pulling her to me and kissing her again. Everything that followed happened as if in a haze, passionate kisses, feverish caresses, clothes falling to the floor. We made love right there, on the carpet in the living room, forgetting about everything in the world. At that moment, there was only us, our passion, and our wild, unrestrained desire. I didn't think about the consequences. I didn't think about betraying Lisa. All thoughts flew out of my head, leaving only a blinding, burning pleasure. Only afterward, lying in each other's arms and trying to catch our breath, did we realize what we had done. Reality crashed down on us like a bucket of cold water. "God, John, what have we done?" Margaret whispered, hiding her face on my chest. "How could we?" I held her tighter, feeling my heart clench with guilt and regret. She was right. We had made a terrible, unforgivable mistake. We had betrayed Lisa's trust, destroyed what should have been unshakable. "We can't see each other anymore, John," Margaret said resolutely, pulling away. "What happened? It must never happen again. We have to forget about it, for Lisa's sake, for the sake of our families." I silently nodded, realizing that she was right. We quickly dressed, avoiding looking each other in the eye. And then I left, feeling my familiar world changing. Everything had changed, and I knew it would never be the same again. As she said goodbye, Margaret only nodded briefly to me, as if putting a period at the end of our short but so vivid story. The next morning I woke up with a heavy head and a slight feeling of shame. The events of the previous night seemed like some kind of surreal dream, but the pleasant languor in my body reminded me that it was all real. I sat up in bed and rubbed my temples. Wow, I slept with my own mother-in-law. It sounds like the plot of a cheap novel or a joke. I wonder what Lisa would say if she found out. This thought made me uncomfortable. No, Lisa definitely shouldn't find out anything, like everyone else. What happened between me and Margaret is our little secret that we will take to the grave. I looked at the clock, almost noon. It was time to return to reality, to my usual life. To get up, have breakfast, go to work, to pretend that nothing had changed. Only everything had changed. I myself had changed, as if some part of me had remained there in Margaret's embrace. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get it back. The next few days passed as if in a fog. I mechanically performed my duties, smiled at my colleagues, called Lisa. But inside me, it was as if a void had formed that could not be filled. I often caught myself thinking about Margaret. I remembered her touch, her kisses, her passion, and each time I felt a mixture of excitement and guilt, but I was determined that it would not happen again. Margaret and I had crossed a line, but that didn't mean we had to go down that path any further. We both had families, obligations, and we couldn't. We had no right to destroy everything for the sake of a fleeting infatuation. So when Lisa returned from her business trip, I greeted her with open arms and a bouquet of flowers. I hugged her, kissed her, told her how much I missed her, and I hardly lied. I really did love Lisa. Our marriage might not have been perfect, we might have drifted apart over the years, but she was my wife, the mother of my children, and I wasn't going to throw it all away for a silly fling. Life gradually returned to its usual course: work, home, family dinners, and TV watching in the evenings. Lisa and I made plans for the future, discussed summer vacations and renovations in the living room, and only sometimes, when I was alone with myself, I allowed myself to think about Margaret, about our little adventure that turned my life upside down. But I knew I had to let go of those memories. lock them away in the farthest corner of my mind. Because reality was here, next to my wife and children, and everything else was just a sweet dream, a mirage that dissipated in the light of day. A month later, Margaret and I saw each other for the first time since the incident, at Lisa's birthday party. We behaved pointedly, politely, and friendly, as if nothing had happened. But once our eyes did meet, and in Margaret's eyes, I saw a reflection of my own feelings, sadness, regret, and a silent question. What if? However, that question remained unanswered, because we both knew there would be no if. We had made our choice and had to live with it. And I lived, day after day, week after week, finding joy in familiar things, in the smiles of loved ones, in small family celebrations. And Margaret, well, she became my sweet memory, a secret I would keep for the rest of my life, and a part of me that would always belong to her. But you know what's funny? Every time I open the door of our fridge, I can't help but smile, because the same damn appliance has become a silent witness and symbol of my fall from grace. And don't you dare break down. I know what it can lead to, and my psyche definitely can't handle a second time. So take care of your appliances, friends, and your mothers-in-law, because you never know what an innocent house call for a repairman might turn into. That's the way it is. Did you like this story? Let us know in the comments what you liked. Subscribe to our storytelling podcast. Also, don't forget to like and ring the bell so you don't miss more interesting stories. See you soon.